our language forms our brain, right? And it is culturally and linguistically, formative. So it isn't just like a list of vocabulary. It's our sort of a whole way of thinking or approaching the world and our
Mhm.
in moment in it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fluency Project, the podcast where language learners unlock their potential. We are on a mission to empower language learners by sharing practical tools, new ways of thinking, and inspiring stories so you can break through barriers and thrive in your language journey. My name is David Herrera. I am your host, and in every episode, I will sit down with polyglots, educators, and everyday learners who have cracked the code. Together, we are going to explore the habits, strategies, and aha moments that make fluency achievable for you. Today's episode is brought to you by thefluencyproject.com. If you are in a journey to learn Spanish, English, or French, you are in luck because we are opening our calendar for free assessments on your level on these languages and helping you to craft the best way to learn. Follow the link in the show notes and you will be able to schedule your 100% free language assessment spot. I would recommend to do it as soon as you can because we have limited spots and we just open those once a week. With that said, let's dive into today's conversation. I'm here with Orna Shaughnessy, a professor of the University of Denver. And well, I'm really excited to talk to you. How are you, Orna? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, David. I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation with you and to discover someone who's as enthusiastic about language and learning about new languages and cultures as I am. So this is going to be really fun today.
It is going to be really, really fun. So, well, let's start with your experience and who you are. I know that your work bridges Japanese literature, pop culture, and language pedagogy. Why is culture so important to you to shape how you teach Japanese today?
Um, It's really important because I think it gets at the motivation piece, the why we should bother to put in all this work to learn a language, especially a language like Japanese. So I know a lot of people in this generation going through college, sort of at this age, have experienced a lot of Japanese cultural production growing up and are curious about it and want to delve into it more deeply, or are inspired by it and want to use it as inspiration for some of their creative and professional work going forward. So I think really exploring those cultural pieces is a really fun way to motivate someone to learn a language. And it also then helps you when you learn that language, then you can go back and delve into much more richly and deeply into those things that you were really fascinated by in the first place. I mentioned this generation, but for me, so I do teach Japanese here at
Mhm.
DU at the University of Denver. But I was also, like number of my students now, a teenager growing up and interested in a lot of Japanese cultural production, anime and Japanese fashion, and the glamour of Tokyo as a city, as a metropolis was really cool to me, and I wanted to learn more about it, and so that is sort of my origin as well for why I started learning Japanese.
That's amazing. So, what was the point when you say, well, I really like Japanese and I really want to go deep and teach this to other people?
Um, yeah, so the teaching piece is kind of separate. I do love teaching, and that is, about this topic or about other kinds of things. I really love, spreading enthusiasm and sharing knowledge and cultivating folks and seeing them succeed is really a fun, wonderful way to live, in my opinion. I do really like teaching, but in terms of Japanese, I didn't have Japanese offered in my high school at all. There was no access to it at all. And I got reading some novels in translation. One particular author, Abe Kobo, is a science fiction writer, and it's a really compelling, cool novels. And I was reading his novels, and at that moment, I decided I want to read these novels in Japanese. But I don't have a way to learn Japanese yet. This is before smartphones. This is long
Yeah.
ago. So I just didn't have a lot of like independent study tools. And so I think I developed this idea short on details but big on ambition of like, well, I will learn Japanese in college and I will move to Japan and really become fluent in Japanese.
Hmm.
And I'm just gonna keep going with that. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of tools do you use back in the day?
Right. So this was like we barely had email. I mean, you can't really imagine it now. And it's such a joy now for all these extra tools that we have now that I love seeing my students work with, and they introduce to me and I introduce to them, and all the many resources we have. Um, but no, we had textbooks and classes, and I also decided I needed to live in Japan for a while to have that immersion piece, and just worked hard at it. I continue to engage, with my own learning, and like when I'm reading new stuff or a new body of vocabulary that I'm not super up on, with my phone now, with all those apps and things that I can use on my phone is really wonderful. A supplement to the sort of more traditional way that I learned back in the day.
I see. Yeah, we can call it like a more traditional way, like textbooks and, classrooms and the
Yeah,
immersion part in the
yeah,
country.
yeah.
I feel that as of today, we can have immersion pretty much in our homes with all the new technology and all that. But the immersion part in the actual culture is important as well.
Yeah, I do think so. And I think you and I are going to have an interesting, maybe different, slightly different positions on this, because I do think um, there's things that you can do at home by yourself with all of our tools and resources and stuff. But often when I see students that do that exclusively, that self-study piece without having a learning community or sort of an expert guide or teacher or something like that, that often we reproduce our own cultural blind spots. And this is not
Hmm.
just for Japanese, but for other things. So I think having those resources in addition to being in some kind of a learning community often really helps actually break open those parameters. Our language forms our brain, right? And it is culturally and linguistically, formative. So it isn't just like a list of vocabulary. It's our sort of a whole way of thinking or approaching the world and our
Hmm.
in moment in it. And so these things are informed by culture. And if you don't have any kind of access to other folks to like sound things out or interact with, then sometimes you can just reproduce your own cultural parameters inadvertently, I think.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what you mean by cultural blind spots. You can miss part of the culture and just reproduce things that are wrong, I will say, and keep it wrong for a long time.
Yeah. So one fun one about Japanese that I really love, and I think it really pertains to our cultural moment in the United States right now, is in English. Here in the United States, we use pronouns, right? So I
Hmm.
have my pronouns she, her, and that has certain kind of cultural identity work that's being done with those words. And then there's also like a grammatical piece that, like in English, I need to use a pronoun there, just to be grammatically correct. In Japanese, you don't necessarily need pronouns. So, in a
Oh,
sentence, you can just drop that completely out of a sentence and still be grammatically correct. And there is sort of no linguistic problem there. If I
interesting.
didn't know that, I would be constantly inserting from my assumption in English that I need I, you, he, she. I need that word in there
Hmm.
because that's my sort of parameters in my brain, from English, from a native speaker's English point of view. I would be inserting those into every sentence that I was trying to say in Japanese, and that's not natural Japanese. It's not quite like wrong, as you said, but it's just it's like sort of making Japanese kind of feel like English, which is it's kind of a
I
weird
see. Yeah, yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
And so that's what I mean about like if I'm self-studying and I don't realize that I don't need pronouns in this other linguistic system, for example,
That makes sense.
then and I don't have any contact with other folks that can like correct me in live time or suggest some cool new shows to watch or whatever, then I risk that kind of error creeping in. That's kind of this combination of linguistic and cultural frameworks that we all bring with us.
That's amazing. I had no idea. I don't know anything about Japanese, so that's something that I'm learning today, and that is pretty cool. Thanks for sharing that.
It's really cool and it's fun. That I think that's part of the amazing part of learning new languages, is you recognize your own self differently and better. Like,
Mm.
who would have even thought that this pronoun thing was optional or required or the kind of work, we don't have as much opportunity to reflect on it until you get into another linguistic system. And then you're like, wow, there's this whole other option here. And so anyway, that's the sort of the delight of languages, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is very interesting about languages. You can have a I don't know if this is what you mean. In my case, personally, sometimes when I speak in English, I have kind of a different personality than when I try to speak in my native language, which is Spanish. I'm way funnier in Spanish than in English, but it's just something that is interesting how the mind can just adapt to that language and adapt to that culture and the way to transmit the ideas that you have in mind.
I love that idea of being someone slightly different in different languages.
Hmm.
That when did you first sort of recognize like your English speaking self was like not the same or
Well, I usually back in my country again in Colombia, we speak Spanish, and I'm the kind of person who makes a lot of jokes while in a conversation, and not like just like dumb jokes, like just comments and that kind of things. And I realized that here in the US, I'm more um quiet. I shyer as well. I don't share a lot of my thoughts just because I probably don't know the whole context or some of the words that I can use to transmit that idea. And that makes me a little bit, you know, I don't talk a lot here. Still transmit my ideas, but in a more, I will say, like professional way, in a more professional setting, but in a natural way, like talking with friends and that kind of things. I'm a little bit different than I am in Colombia.
how interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool. Now I haven't really thought about this before, but now that you say it, I think I am a little bit different when I am speaking in Japanese and in Japan than I am in English. Maybe um, more careful and kind of more precise. And I see those as being direct through lines to certain qualities of Japanese culture that I find myself sort of subconsciously just trying to like fit into or adapt
Yeah.
to or something like that.
You make it as perfect as possible, I will say. Like try to
Yeah,
make it like the best possible of the language. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. How interesting. My
Hmm.
goodness.
Yeah,
And
it's very interesting.
I also, I'm not sure if this is quite what you meant, but that idea of having different levels of confidence in different languages too, and your own sort of your native ones, the language that you grew up speaking
Mhm.
versus languages that you learned later on in life. Yeah, there might be a difference there as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, and more when you learn that like as an adult and not like just growing up with two different languages, that maybe that's a little bit different. So, um, let me ask you, many professionals avoid, Japanese like a difficult language just because it's difficult. How would you rewrite the narrative about hard languages being unlearnable?
Um, well, I think that in the contemporary United States, we have a bigger problem than just hard languages. We seem to have maybe a cultural attitude and also certain structures, like educational structures, that are not that hospitable, shall we say, to to
Okay.
learning languages. And so not just hard ones, but like any of them. So I think one thing is this assumption that English is all that you need, and also that everyone is an English speaker is a pretty pervasive assumption, I think, in contemporary United States. That would be my anecdotal opinion, but of course, it's not true, right? I think we are getting close to majority Spanish-speaking country,
Uh,
maybe.
right now, the United States, yeah, it's pretty close. It's not still, but yeah, it's pretty close.
I think it's pretty close. And I mean, I watch the statistics and stuff like that, but I just think like there's a certain kind of cultural self-image maybe that is commonly held in the United States that is actually not kind of factually true. And nevertheless, I think it prevents people from feeling like highly motivated to learn other languages. And then, as I say, structurally too, as we all know, in the contemporary United States, languages are in sort of mainstream public schools are not taught from young ages. The soonest you really get access to it is middle school.
Hmm.
We have the research that that's already a little bit too late, or you'll have a different relationship. It'll be in a different part of your brain where you're doing that language acquisition. Unlike Europe, where they start very young and they do multiple languages, and it's seen as just normal and something that everybody does.
Oh, that's
Um,
amazing. Yeah.
but I do. So I'm thinking for the students that enter into the Japanese program at the college level where I am, um, they aren't worried that the Japanese is like quote unquote hard, although I think it is one of the hardest for native English speakers to learn because it's just so many degrees of different. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't think they care particularly because they're really interested in, as I said, the cultural production or directions in their career or ways that they're inspired or curious about the world. Um, so I don't see that that's necessarily holding people back too much. I think in the middle of it, like when you're in year two and year three and you're really pushing through trying to learn some of the dimensions of the writing system, for example, that are really, really different from English, for example, or Spanish.
Hmm.
Then I think working on that motivation to make sure that you keep going and keep putting in that work is important. I was going to say I'm going to put a little advertisement or a plug out there. My friends who are native Spanish speakers um, say, and I hear this with my ear too, that the pronunciation in Japanese is a lot like the pronunciation in Spanish, and so it's just
Oh.
like hand in glove. Those folks, those lucky folks, those multilinguals, don't really that Spanish is a positive in terms of just the way that it sounds. Um, so that's just something of like, yeah, that's counter to the narrative of like, oh my gosh, it's the hardest thing ever. It isn't necessarily, and I see cohort after cohort of students who, after 4 years, can really do dramatically cool, pretty fluent things with Japanese. So I
Hmm.
see it
That's
that success
amazing.
is certainly possible.
That's great. I mean, again, that is just kind of the perception of these kind of languages, just because they're from a country that we don't know much. We just know, like the cartoons, the anime, and all that. That's pretty much what we know about those cultures, but not like in like the immersion in that culture per se. And yeah, you mentioned something that very interesting because that happens in Colombia as well. When I was learning English, and I learned English because I was told that that was quote unquote the language of the world. And yeah, I assume that everyone everywhere speak English. And yes, still like a lot of people speak English, but that is not the only language that you can use to make business or to just communicate with people. There is a lot of people in the world just to use one language to communicate with all of them. And as I mentioned a little bit before as well, English can, I mean, if you cannot communicate the ideas in that language, it is going to be a bit harder to communicate in your native language or even in the English language because each culture is different and they receive the ideas in a whole different way. So yeah, that is something that I wanted to just to mention.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the writing systems and all that part of the Japanese language. Um, I asking this because a lot of adult learners, they kind of have some fear about that writing. I'm one of them because I see all of those characters and I don't know what to do with those. So what's your getaway method to make character memorization feel approachable?
Okay, so I have a whole philosophy on this. But so a couple of things. Yeah, so in English, we have the Roman alphabet, the ABCs.
Hmm.
Japanese also uses that alphabet when they want to, in particular times. They have the kana writing systems of hiragana and katakana. And typically in college, you'll learn those in anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. So that's just like another syllabary, kind of like the ABCs, but they're in different shapes and they sound a little different, but that's really not that hard to do. So that actually is very much achievable. And just that's one of the nice things, if you're in a, a high-paced program, structured program, you're just going to learn those pretty rapidly. The tricky thing, I think, for a lot of folks is learning kanji, as you said, the characters. And kanji, of course, comes from China. And this,
Mhm.
in very, very ancient times, they were, sacred symbols that were used to sort of divine, political decisions and different kinds of sort of uses like that. There's some of them that are pictographs, which means that it's like the word pictures in there, right? So it kind of looks like what it is. So, for example, the character for sun, like the sun in the sky, kind of looks. I mean, if you make your mind see it, it kind of looks like a sun.
Oh.
And you can see where that, in ancient times that came from sort of a drawing of the sun and it means sun. Where it gets delightful in Japanese, delightfully hard, magnificently hard, is Japanese, when they adopted this writing system from China, the learned politicians and religious figures learned the Chinese readings of those. So they brought in those sounds from China. And then there was this indigenous Japanese sounds that were already there circulating, and they meshed those two together. And so the kanji is incredibly vexed and complicated, and the way that it interacts with the language and the sounds. I will say though, so that's the piece that like I have students do kind of two a day, and I tell them plan on like two a day for the next couple of years. But at a certain point, then you're going to wake up one day and be able to read a newspaper, and it's going to be extraordinary. It's going to be so exciting. So that's one thing of like it's just like keep putting in the time for a little bit, and it seems like a lot, but it just keep going. I've seen student after student after student be successful. The other thing is that different from my times when I was a learner, our tools now are phenomenal. So our phones, you can pull them out and the phone will read that character for you. I don't recommend depending exclusively on the phone or the app or the technology, the reader, the screen reader, all of those tools. But because then you're not learning the language, you're just sort of translating it into your own language system, and then you're not getting any of that cultural difference and nuance that you want. But the tools can really support you when you're out there and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot that kanji again. And you whip up your phone and it tells you, and you're like, yes, I remember it. So it's a super helpful way of overcoming these little roadblocks when you're out there engaging with this could be sitting at home, here in Denver, engaging with some piece of cultural production, or it could be out while you're traveling. But instead of like hitting a roadblock and being like, okay, that's it, I don't understand what's going on anymore, the tool can help kind of get you engaged enough in it and get you over those little roadblocks. And the more that you're engaged with it, the more that your brain is picking it up and remembering.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I really like the part of the consistency. You have to keep going. You have to keep trying. You have to keep, you know, just making the homework that you have to do in order to learn a thing. It is not gonna appear magically in your mind, or you're going to just your hand is going to, draw the characters by itself. That is not
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
happen. You
yeah,
have
yeah,
to create that consistency. And these tools that you're mentioning, there are a bunch, 1,000 of apps to learn languages.
yeah.
But those should be a tool that you can use in order to learn the language, and not
Yeah.
just the only way to learn a language.
What did you find when you were working on your English? Because you had been told, quote unquote, it's the language of the world, and so you're like, okay, I'm getting a lot of pressure to learn this.
Yeah.
Did you find you were able to do like consistent daily study, or what was your journey like? Did you struggle sometimes, or how did you get you back in the saddle, or what was your process like?
Ooh, well, in my case, my personal case was more like self-taught. I learned English by the like listening to music or watching movies. I started reading books. I didn't have any idea of that. I served as a missionary in Ecuador. They don't speak English, of course, but I had a lot of companions from America, and
Ah,
I
yes.
just practiced small things with them, like asking how to ask for food, or how to ask for a bathroom, or those kind of short phrases. And I practice and practice and practice with them. I hear them, and I like to watch their mouth making the movement of the word. And in that way I just try to replicate that. And when I get back home, I just do that. I just listen music. I just read books. And the only way that I had to practice was trying to practice with people who speak Spanish, and I was trying to speak in English and see if they make any faces, if I sound, I will say, interesting to them. And the second thing, I was just talking alone in the streets. I was literally just talking out loud, saying the things that I was remembering, the presentations and all that, until I get to the point that I say, well, I think that with this level of English, I can find a job, and I find a job, and that was, the way I improve in general my English. But that was my, I didn't have classes per se. I just have that, again, the same consistency, trying to practice and learning. I didn't have apps either. They were
Yeah, yeah,
rare back in the
yeah,
day as well.
yeah, yeah. That's it sounds like you have the most precious thing of all, which is that sort of enthusiasm and motivation. And you were just, you were going to dive in and find the opportunity in any way you could. That's absolutely wonderful.
Exactly, exactly. And for me, it was a need. I needed to find a job. I couldn't find a job like in general, and there were a bunch of call centers, bilingual call centers,
Oh, yes,
hiring.
yes.
I saw, well, that is an opportunity. They pay more than any other jobs here. I need to do that. And that's why that was the main motivation, honestly.
I have friends who work in call centers. Those are good jobs.
Oh yeah,
I'm
you
thinking
learn a
in
lot.
Guatemala. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, in those you can learn a lot. I remember my first days on that. I was like so confused with all the accents, all the new words. My goodness, what is going on? I don't speak English, but I just keep going and keep trying. And I, in the conversations, I just pick a couple of words, and with that, I just base my whole conversation. So yeah, it's a whole journey, and that depends of the goal and the motivation of the person who is learning the language at the end.
This is random, but do you know, we frequently, like in our life, we have to call in to, an insurance company or the bank or something, and we get a call center.
Hmm.
Um, I always love like listening to the person who's helping me, because they're usually offshore call centers. And I just have this like image in my mind of this like bright young person doing their very best. I don't
And
know.
that's it.
I hear like a lot of complaints or whatever about I don't know, in the the our culture wars right now, but yeah, when I hear those folks in from many different parts of the world, doing their best to help me with my little problem in English, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm not even speaking that clearly, or I'm rushing, or I'm annoyed at the problem, or whatever it is, and they handle it. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And I've been working in call centers for a long time, and we can see both sides. We understand the client, but we also understand the agent who is sometimes struggling with the language, or with the pronunciation, or with, well, a lot of different factors that can influence the how good they can understand that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Actually, thank you for sharing that that experience, and for saying that. I don't know. Maybe I answered one of your calls back in the day. I have no idea. Probably. So, I want to ask just a couple more questions to you, because again, language learning and Japanese in general is, for me, again, something, for me, is like an Everest. I have never thought of learning a language like a Japanese or Chinese or anything like that, just because I see it like so big. But you use films to to help people learn a language. What's your method? How do you do that with movies to learn Japanese?
Well, I actually, so this is partly connected with the people that I teach are college age or older, quote unquote college age, but like sort of 18 or over, right? So
Hmm.
so the folks that I teach are actually adult learners. They're not kids who are forced to be in a class. They've chosen to be there. And so I think one really important dimension of working with adult learners is that it has to be something, whatever material or whatever it is that we're working on, it has to be something that the adult finds interesting or connected to their goals or their career goals or their personal interests in some way. So I don't have it's not my place to choose for them the thing that interest them. So I do try to have either for anime or drama, right? Sort of
Mhm.
live action TV shows, or some students really are interested in like interviews of their favorite pop stars, or like delving into that kind of cultural production. I need to give students like lots of choices so that they can get into something, as an independent adult learner that they actually value or find interesting. So I don't get to prescribe like you
I
have to
see.
watch
Yeah.
this thing, um, and I use it. So I pair it with, textbook work or structured work, where we're working on, some specific like grammar thing, or figuring out how this clause works, or how particles work or something like that. Um, the cultural production piece, then I think it's important for learners to allow themselves to just be open to it and enjoy it and experience it. And so they might have, we might start with like a couple of comprehension questions and make sure that the context is clear. Because I find once you get the context, then you can infer a lot and you'll be able to participate more. But if it's like stone cold, brand new, and you have no idea what's going on, then that can build frustration, which is a bad idea, right? We don't want
Yeah.
less frustration
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
language
Yeah.
learning. We want to reduce frustration. So doing some basic sort of frameworking where we have the context clear, we have a couple of key vocabulary words. So we've done the context in very simple target language work so that those key vocabulary are right there right in our ears and in the forefront of our mind. And then to be allowed to give yourself permission, give the adult learner permission to not understand some of it and to enjoy some of it. And to take away, like, say, three things that they thought were interesting, or a phrase that they heard that they had more questions about, so that they get to direct what they extract from the anime or the drama or the film, is really important. And as I say, I use that in companion with more structured things where I'm saying, this is really a good idea if this is the next grammar thing that you work on, because it's going to build into sort of a better set of fluencies for these kinds of situations or whatever it is that they want to do.
That makes a lot of sense. And well, it's good that you don't impose that movie that they have to watch, because at the end of the day as well, um, it is better if you decide the way that you want to learn in some
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
Even if it's a structure in a classroom, you still have some freedom to choose whatever you want to learn and the way that you want to learn and from the context that you want to learn.
yeah, yeah.
In my case, for example, as I mentioned before, English was just for work. I wasn't learning English to go to a bar or anything like that. I wanted to have the English for work.
Or
So
telling jokes, right? Unfortunately, you
yeah,
neglected
yeah,
it.
I didn't learn the one for jokes. I should try that one. But yeah, so yeah, that is a great approach, and I feel that your students are, getting better in that way because they have that opportunity to choose the way, and with your frameworks and the ways that you present the class, they are gonna be able to start getting some parts of the language. Of course, in one class, you're not going to have everything that you need to know, but still, that consistency, that process is the process which is important in
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Orna, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time and your insights and your story. I want us to close our podcast today with one last question, and that is a challenge. At the end of the podcast, we always try to offer our listeners a way to start practicing the languages that they're learning. So, what's one challenge that you can give our listeners to learn a new language or improve the one that they are learning right now?
Well, it's very connected, I think, to what we were just talking about. So my challenge for anybody listening to this would be, if you figured out a language that you're really interested in learning or getting better at, and that language and culture really interests you, my suggestion is to choose to do a little bit of research on what the major TV station or network is in that culture. So for Japan, for example, it would be NHK is a major news broadcaster, and they produce a lot of shows and different, kids stuff and dramas and all kinds of TV programming. And once I research what that major channel is, then at least for yourself, you'll know what's sort of like the broad or generally accepted kind of media content for the culture and language that you're interested in. And so then you can choose, if you're interested in keeping up with the news, you can choose a news show. If you really like soccer and it's a soccer playing
Mhm.
nation, follow the soccer team, right? If you think historical dramas are really cool, they might have one of those for you, or soap operas, or music, reality TV shows, or whatever it is that is there. If you select one of those, then you've got something fun to look forward to that is also helping you get a sense of the parameters of sort of the mainstream expectations. There'll be nuances, there'll be differences, there'll be other stuff, but that's sort of the main thing for that culture and language that you're interested in learning more about. So go for the fun is my challenge this week. Figure out the, the
That's
major
a
TV
great
station
one.
and find the funnest show you can. Just to kind of watch regularly. If it's a weekly show, try to get it in your calendar. Watch a few minutes of it every week.
Awesome. That's a great one, Orna. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being with us today. And well, we hope that we can talk in the future again and keep learning and keep, in this process of learning new languages. Probably Japanese, my next one.
Okay, okay, welcome. It's wonderful. Thank you for having me. It's been such an honor.
Thank you for listening this episode of the Fluency Project. I wish we helped you find your way to learn a new language and that you can use all these tools to help you in the process. Before you go, don't forget about three things. First, share this episode with those you know are learning a new language so they can start getting the tools to thrive. Second, leave us a review in the platform you like. That will help us to reach more language learners. And third, don't forget to secure your free language assessment using the link in the show notes. I'll see you in the next episode to keep growing and learning together. Until next time.